This is KUOW. I'm Paige Browning. Tear gas choked the air, and loud bangs and rubber bullets rang out for days on end last summer in Seattle as police responded to a growing protest over racial injustices. A new report suggests that the response by Seattle police last May inflamed things further, and they should handle future protests much differently. KUOW's Amy Radel has reported on this new analysis and joins us now. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Paige.
So first, where did the analysis of the SPD come from?
This report is called a Sentinel Review, and it was created by a group of police and community members that were brought together by the city's Office of Inspector General. And this particular report takes a really deep dive on that first weekend of protests we saw in Seattle, May 29th up to June 1st. Lisa Judge is the Inspector General for Seattle, and so she told the City Council today that she thought it was important that this group did include community members and police officers.
Because at the end of the day, this report really is for SPD to take to heart and to make those changes to keep this from happening again.
So, Amy, this analysis is of the first incidents of protests at the end of May, early June, and reviews how police handled it. What was happening during that time that the Inspector General reviewed?
Yeah, there was so much happening in just a few days span. Just this weekend accounted for 20% of SPD's use of force related to protests for the rest of 2020. I mean, and, all over different parts of the city. One part of this report that to me was interesting was on May 29th, there were protests in the Chinatown International District. They didn't get as much attention, but the report says that this was really significant for what came in the next few days. And that's because what the report describes was well-organized, mostly white protesters that did some property damage through a neighborhood of Asian American-owned businesses. And police who were watching that, in their mind, became really fearful about anarchists with criminal intent coming to Seattle or participating like this. Community members, their version was the police were standing by and that they would have intervened more if it had been people of color doing this damage. So there was anger and fear that was amping up on multiple sides as this happened. And then the review goes on to look at what happened next downtown. The child who was hit by pepper spray, the destruction of police vehicles, the police rifles getting stolen, and then the confrontations outside the East Precinct where police used tear gas on the demonstrators.
And I heard you say, Amy, that these few days accounted for 20% of SPD's use of force at protests for the rest of 2020. What did this new analysis find?
So this review found that a lot of the things that the police did in response actually inflamed the protests, telling people to leave when they had no way to get out of downtown, for example, using tear gas on an entire crowd rather than focusing on the few people at the edges who were committing crimes. Overall, just not signaling that the police respected the right of those peaceful demonstrators to be there.
Amy, how could this change what we see at the next demonstrations in Seattle?
The report contains 54 recommendations, so dozens and dozens of things to do differently. Lisa Judge says she expects SPD to formally respond to all of them. Some of them are things that SPD says they've already implemented. Better communication. They have more of a PA system to make sure that people in the crowd can hear the instructions. Trying not to inflame anti-police protests specifically by drawing back a bit. And they say they did get more effective at going after specific people committing crimes while protecting the rights of the larger crowd.
Okay, well, what does the report call for that SPD is not currently doing?
Yeah, they have several ideas. And, the Inspector General admitted this is a difficult moment for SPD to take on anything additional. They're confronting staffing shortages and increased gun violence in Seattle. But one thing the report highlights is the importance of officer wellness, that SPD and the city need to focus on preventing the exhaustion and the stress that could be a factor in decision making. Another idea is to have dialogue officers at protests who talk to the protesters before before and during these events just to make better, more smooth communication. SPD says they have done that in the past sometimes. That wasn't something protesters wanted that weekend, but this would take that approach a bit farther. And then one recommendation that isn't something that costs money or staff would be just to change SPD's policy, which right now says they have to be neutral during demonstrations, to allow them to show support of protesters' right to be there in a way that the panel said might have diffused some of these tensions. And they said at the very least, they need to make sure officers who are disrespectful to protesters know that that's unacceptable.
Well, that's all the time we have with Amy Radel, who covers police reform and so many other things for KUOW. Thanks so much, Amy.
Yeah, you're welcome.